Hello everyone and welcome to the course. In this first part of the course, we're going to be learning how to install GDevelop, which is the software that we'll be using all throughout the course. Now, in order to install GDevelop, what you want to do first is just go into your favorite web browser or search engine. And once you get there, all you want to do is type in gdevelop.io/download. And here I already have it auto completed, but this is the exact link that will take you straight to the download page. And once you get to the download page, it's extremely easy to install GDevelop. The only thing you need to worry about is which operating system you're using. This is Windows symbol, this is the Windows Store, this is Apple, this is Linux. I believe this is another type of Linux, but you'll use one of those two if you're using Linux. But if you're using Mac, make sure just to click the Apple. And we're going to click on Windows. And when you click on Windows, GDevelop will install. You can choose where you want to install the GDevelop setup, and you can just click save. Now, I'm not going to go through all the steps here because that would be almost insulting your intelligence. It tells you exactly what to do. The only slight thing you may need to worry about is where you want to save GDevelop itself. But even that's not much of an issue because you can just search up GDevelop no matter where it is on your file system. So all I want you to do for this part is just to click on download and then click on the exe file that saves and then go through GDevelop setup. And I'll catch you in the next part where we'll be creating and saving our first GDevelop project. Welcome back. In this part of the course, we're going to be learning how to create and save our first GDevelop project. Now, you've already chosen where to save GDevelop, but just in case you do not know where to find it or you forgot, all you have to do is go to Windows down here, and I believe Apple has a similar feature, and then just type in GDevelop 5. And then this will pop up here, and then all you have to do is click GDevelop 5. And once you click it, you just wait a little bit for it to load up. It'll take some time. And once it loads up, we're going to get into creating our very first project. Now, I'll be greeted with this because I've used GDevelop before. I'll be greeted with my most recent project I've been working on. So since you're not going to see this, I'm going to X out all of these tabs here. I'm going to X out all of my tabs. And once you're done Xing out all of your tabs, you'll be greeted with the home screen. And your home screen, if you're on my current version of GDevelop, should look exactly like this. You'll have official game dev courses, and these are pretty good, so you can check them out if you want to. But we want to create our very first project. Now, to create your first project, all you want to do is go into the top left with the 3 bar icons. And once you go here, you want to click into File. And then you have the option of creating a game. And you also have the keyboard shortcut, Alt plus Control plus N. We're going to create our first game. And of course, GDevelop can be used for games or apps, but just is catered towards games. And when you want to create your first project, since it's going to be our very first one, we don't want to use a template or AI. So we're going to create an empty project here. Now, these are the important things. When you click create a new game, this is the resolution. Now, the resolution is the least important thing right here because we can change the resolution whenever we want. So we're not going to worry too much about the resolution. We're going to keep it default. Now, this is more important. I'm going to name my project because we have the project name. So I'm going to type in tutorial test since I'm making a tutorial. Tutorial test 1 because I have probably several of these. So also you have the second part is where to store this project. You can either use GDevelop Cloud or your computer. Now, I recommend you use your computer because GDevelop Cloud has limited space, and I believe that's a silver or gold feature, not the free version of GDevelop. So we're going to save it on our computer. Now, this is the most important part because it's very easy to lose your GDevelop project in your file system. You never want to use the default pathway. The default pathway is not very good. You want to choose a folder where you want to save it. So I'm going to choose a folder. And just to make it easy to find if you're a beginner, I always recommend you save things on your desktop as a beginner. But if you're more advanced with file systems, of course, you can save it wherever you want. So we're going to select our desktop. Now, not only do you want to just select the desktop, you could keep it open, but it's better to have all of your GDevelop files and projects in a folder, not just raw on your file system because it can take up space and it just looks disorganized. So I'm going to create a new folder, and you can name this whatever you want, but I recommend that you name the folder the same name as your project. And in our case, the name of the project is tutorial test 1. So I'm going to rename the folder into tutorial test and then 1, and then select the folder. And after you're done selecting the folder, make sure that actually represents it on the text box, and then all you have to do is click create new game. Now, once that's done, we're almost done with this part right here. All you have to do is save the project. So there's 2 ways to save your project. You can either go into the top left and click save project, or you can use Control S and the project is saved. And that's all you have to do to create and save your first GDevelop project. In the next part, we're going to be going over GDevelop's interface. Welcome back to the course. In this part of the course, we're going to be learning about GDevelop's interface. Now, one thing that you need to know when learning about GDevelop's interface is that just like any software, you're not going to immediately memorize everything. You're not going to understand every part of the interface, and we're not going to be going into every part of GDevelop's interface because GDevelop has a lot of things that you can do in its interface. So if we were to go into every single feature, you would quickly get overwhelmed. But we're going to go through the major parts of GDevelop's interface that you can use to create most projects, especially basic projects. Now, when you first open GDevelop, the default scene should look similar to this or very, very close to this. But in order for us to learn, I'm going to go into my top right here, and these are different panels that you can activate. The highlighted panels means that they're activated. So I'm going to close all of my panels just so we can understand what's going on. Now, this big view right here of this screen that we have is almost white. It's like a whitish grayish, and we have a black outline. This is what's called the scene view. And the scene view is where all items or objects in your game or app are placed. This is the scene view right here. So we're starting off with the scene view. The scene view is always here. You can't get rid of it because you always need it. If without the scene view, there's nowhere for your objects to go. And this black border right here, this is basically what the player sees by default. Any object that's inside this black border is what the player will see when they first start the game or the app. So now that we know about the scene view, and make sure you can go slow and rewind this video whenever you want. Don't be afraid if you don't memorize everything. We're going to click into this cube up top, and this is the objects panel. Now the objects panel is self-explanatory in its name. This is where you add objects to your game or your app. So we're going to add a new object just as a test. And when you add a new object, you can either use one from the asset store or create it from scratch. Let's just use an object from scratch. And there are many different types of objects. We're not going to go into all of them right now. This is very dependent on what you're trying to make. But the basic one, which is the element of a 2D game, is a sprite. And a sprite is basically just a picture. So we're going to create a sprite as a test. And when you're creating an object, there's always an object name. So you want to name it something that makes sense. I'm going to name it a cube. And you can either import images or create one with Piskel. In this case, we're just testing things out. So you can create one with Piskel, which is a pixel art software. Don't worry if you don't know how to use it. Just follow along really quickly. We're just doing a few tests. We're not going to have to worry about creating our own art here. I'm just going to create a cube using the paint bucket tool, and I'm going to color it. And you could add a new color by managing the palette. It's pretty simple to use, but don't worry if you can't use the software. We're not going to be using it too much here. We're just learning the basics. So we have a cube, and once you create your object, what you want to do is hit apply. And when you hit apply, now we have a new object in our interface, in our scene view, or in our object panel, not the scene view, my bad. Now, when we drag this, how do we put it on the scene? We can drag our object onto the scene by just simply clicking it and then dragging it. And we can create several of these. We can create an infinite amount of these. Now, let's say we want to delete all of our objects. We could individually click them and then press delete on our keyboard, or we could right click them and press delete. But if you want to delete several at the same time, you can drag over it, and then all of them will be selected at the same time, and then you can put delete on your keyboard or right click and press delete. But that's just the simplicity of adding objects to your scene view. Now, another very important thing, and probably one of the only things that we're going to cover right now, everything else is slightly more advanced. The last important thing that we're worrying about is the properties panel. And the properties panel will showcase the properties of your object. So what do I mean by this? When you add an object onto your scene, you just have this regular little cube. But every object in GDevelop has properties. So let's click into our cube on the scene, and you'll see that our properties panel now has new things. We have the X position, we have the Y position, we have the Z order or Z position. It's technically both. But we have the width and the height. We have the opacity, which will change how transparent our object is. We even have layers. We're not going to cover layers, a little bit more advanced right now. But we also have the rotation, which is right here, and the animation. And we even have variables. Once again, a little bit more advanced. But we can change whatever properties we want. in the properties panel. So let's change the position. Let's say I set it to 600. You see that our X position has now changed. And for Y, I can set it to 1000. And you'll see that it goes all the way to the bottom. You can also drag around your objects and stretch them around using the nodes that are on the corners of the object. So these are all of the basics of GDevelop in terms of its interface. And just a little recap, you always as default have the scene view. The scene view is what the player or user sees. Then you have the object panel, and this is where you add new objects and you can drag objects onto your scene. You can also delete them whenever you want. And last but not least, you make sure you have your properties panel open, but you have properties of your object, and this is where you can edit different parts of your object. And that is the basics of GDevelop's interface. Just remember, you can rewatch this video whenever you want. You can reference it whenever you want because you get the most benefit by actually using GDevelop. When you're using an app or software, the best thing to do is to use it to memorize it. Not just memorize it by watching, memorize it by using. So make sure to just play around the editor a little bit so you can get more familiar with GDevelop's interface. Because in the next part, we'll be going over GDevelop's event editor. Welcome back to the course. In this part, we're going to be learning about GDevelop's event editor. Now, if you didn't already know, GDevelop does not use traditional code, but it also doesn't use traditional visual scripting like blocks or nodes. It doesn't use any of those. What it uses is events. Now, before I go into the event editor, this is how the event editor actually looks. You can click up top on your untitled scene and go into events. But if you made a mistake and closed it out by mistake, what you want to do is go into the top left and then click your scene, and this will automatically pop up again. So if I exit out, go to my top left corner and then click into my untitled scene, you'll see that the events pop up all over again. Now, I'm going to explain events in a visual way because this may be your first time ever dealing with something similar to events. So I'm going to explain this visually. So here I have a whiteboard, and if I go back into GDevelop, you'll see if I add an event, I have two parts of an event. I have a condition and I have an action. Now I want to explain these. Now when it comes to a condition is not something that's complicated. A condition simply equals an if or an if statement. So condition is if. If this thing happens, then we want to do something. And the then is the action. Action is then. So if I just click in this and type in action equals then. Now it makes a little bit more sense. So GDevelop's events. One event has two parts. As you can see, if I add a new event, one event has two parts, a condition and an action. And basically this is an if statement and this is a then statement. If such and such happens, then such and such will be the result of that condition. So that is how if statements work. Now, how do you actually use this in a realistic scenario in GDevelop? Now, if I add a condition, remember that's the if. If I add a condition, we have different things that we can do on our conditions. Now, we have object conditions that are specific to the object checking. We can check its X position. We can check its angle. We can check all sorts of different properties of the object itself. But we also have other conditions, which is very important, where we can check things like variables, input, audio, camera, user interface. We have a lot of different things that you can check in conditions. Now, let's say I want to do a keyboard press. Let's say if the W key on my keyboard is pressed, then if the W key is pressed, I want to delete our red cube that we have. I want to delete this cube. So how do we accomplish this using GDevelop? Well, GDevelop is so simple and well designed that you can actually speak in English to solve many of your problems. So let's think about the if statement. The if statement is if the W key is pressed. That's the if statement. So let's figure out how to do that in GDevelop. Now remember, the first thing you want to do is go into your add condition. And now we want to go into other conditions because we're handling input. We're handling input. So you want to go into other conditions. Remember, we want to check if the W key is pressed. So now we can check for a key press. If the W key is pressed, and what you can do here is type down any key that you want to check. We're going to type in W and then click into W. Click OK. So now we have the condition. We have if the W key is pressed, Then we want to do a certain action. And remember the action was we want to delete the cube. So we're going to do that. So we're going to add an action. And then when you click into cube, this is what we're trying to delete. So remember, every time you're trying to alter an object, you want to click into the object first, and then you can scroll down until you find delete the object. I'm going to click OK. Now, if I preview the game, it's going to take a little bit of time to load up. Now, this is our cube that we have right here. Right now, nothing's happening. I'm clicking on screen. But if you press W on your keyboard, you should see that it deletes itself. And that is how you do conditions and actions in GDevelop. Now, one thing to understand, just like coding, you will not be able to memorize every single condition and every single event, but it's important to understand the foundation of it. For example, you don't have to memorize all of the ways of input. You can just go into the input and read it. It's very easy to read GDevelop's conditions. And another thing that I almost forgot to say is that if you want to alter your conditions or your actions, you can double click into the condition, click OK, or you can double click into your action and click OK. Also, another thing that you can do is that you can right click into the event itself and delete it. You can copy it or you can paste it. These are the basic actions. So if I copy this event, I can also paste it here. And these are the extra things that you can do. Now, I'm not going to cover all of this because I'm going to be covering a lot of this as we start making games or making apps, whatever your goal is. But just know that you can double click to alter your conditions. You can double click to alter your actions. And you'll be able to test out many things on your own in terms of memorizing GDevelop. But of course, we're going to learn most of this by actually using it itself. Now, I highly recommend, before we end off this part of the course, I highly recommend that you re-watch this part and play around using the event editor. Right-clicking on things, just checking out different options here. But I highly recommend that you replay this tutorial because the event editor is the foundation of all of the functionality in your game or app in GDevelop. But I hope you understood this part. If you didn't, make sure to re-watch it. But once you're done with this section of the course, in the next part, we'll be covering variables in GDevelop. Welcome back to the course. In this part, we're going to be learning about something that is extremely foundational when it comes to making games or apps using GDevelop, and that is the concept of variables. Now, if you've already did some type of programming before, you're probably already familiar with it, but if you haven't, it's definitely important that you pay special attention. Now, first of all, what is a variable? So I'm going to go on my whiteboard, and one of the easiest ways to explain what a variable is that it's really just a container. So here I have a box, and this is a very bad looking box, but don't worry about how bad it looks, just worry about the concept. So we have this box that contains scribble, and that's basically what a variable is. This is a variable. So we're going to have this arrow, and we have V. This box is a variable, and the reason why is that it holds something. A variable is something that holds a value. Now, the thing about variables is that they can hold different things, just like boxes and containers in real life. But when it comes to computers, variables can have numbers in them. This is the number 2. Variables can have text. This is the letter H. And variables can also be set to set up values like true or false. Variables can be quite literally anything you want them to be in terms of computer language. But another thing about variables is that your computer or your program likes to check on these variables and do certain things depending on what's in it. So let's use humans as an example. Let's say you have a container and the container has a cup of water in it. Let's just pretend this has some water. The container has a cup of water. If you open this container, depending on what's in the container, you might do a certain action. So if there's water in the container, then you might drink the water. And I'm not going to sit here and write the whole thing. Well, I just sat here and did it anyway. But if there is water in the container, then you might drink it. Now, what does this have anything to do with computers? Well, your program can check on what's in your variable. For example, if your variable is equal to the number 2, like earlier, then the program might add a new object to your game or your app. It might add something new. So basically, a variable is a container that holds a value. Now, when it comes to gdevelop, how does this relate to gdevelop? How do we actually access our variables? So the way that you access your variables is you go to the top left. This is very important. The top left includes many different things like game settings, the properties, the resources, but how do you actually access your scene variables? And remember, the scene is this view right here where my mouse cursor is. Well, in order to access the scene variables, you want to go into the 3 dots, and then you want to put edit scene variables. Now, this is the actual gdevelop variable editor. So this is the important part here. So in order to add a variable, you just click the button. Now, like I said earlier, you have different types of variables. You also have the value of the variable on the end. But something I didn't say earlier is that every variable has to have a name because you have to be able to reference that variable or that container. So let's create our very first variable. This variable is going to be called, let's call it number container. You can name your variables whatever you want. Just remember to name them something accordingly. Do not play around with your variable names and name them really goofy things that don't relate to the variable. Now we can choose the type of variable. In this case, it's a number container. That's why I named it. So you'll want to set it as a number. And you have different types of variables: text, boolean, which is true or false. An array is a container that has several variables in it, and a structure contains arrays. That is all the different parts, different types of variables. But the most important ones are text, number, and boolean. Remember, boolean is true or false. A number is just a number, and a text is self-explanatory. It's just text. Now, we can set the value of our number container, and we're going to set this value as being equal to 4. We're going to set the value as being equal to 4, and we're going to hit apply. Now, one thing to know is that nothing just changed in our entire program. If I preview this, there's nothing where you'll see the variable. If you go into the events, you can't see the variable. Variables are internally stored, but they can be referenced. And if I go back into my scene variables, let's go into the top left, open up our scene variables. If we go here, we can also create however many variables we want. I can just keep clicking add variable, add variable, add variable. And let's say you want to delete a variable. All you have to do is click the side of it and press delete. So click the side and press delete. This is how you actually use gdevelop's variable editor. And now that you have the knowledge of how to create variables, in the next part we're going to be actually learning how to use variables in your program to make changes to your game or to your app. Hello and welcome back to the course. We are on the final part of the basics of gdevelop. If you get past this, you know more gdevelop than 99% of people. Most people barely know how to use softwares that they get. Now, when it comes to variables, we want to know how to actually use these variables in our game or in our program. And there's a reason why I chose us to create a number variable, because number variables are the most versatile out of all variables in gdevelop or in any program, because you can perform operations on them. You can add things to your number, you can subtract things, you can multiply, divide, perform all sorts of mathematical operations. So they're the perfect way to teach it. So let's get into referencing our variables. Now, before we do that, what do we actually want to accomplish right now? What we want to accomplish is we're going to check on our variable. If our number container that we created, so I'm going to type an N and a C, which stands for number container. If our number variable equals the value of 4, which it already does if you remember from the last part, if that happens, then we want to delete our cube once again. So we want to check if our number container is equal to the value of 4. Because remember, your program can check on your variables. So even though you can't see them, your container does exist. So we want the program to check on our variable. So we're going to go into our events. And remember, if that is our condition, so we want to check if the value of number container is equal to 4, then we want to delete our cube. So we can keep that the same. So we're going to double click into our condition right here, and we're going to change it to something completely different. Now, variables are accessed on the other conditions page. So what you want to do is click into variables, and then now we want to check on our variable value. And we want to check on our variable value. Our variable value right here is number container. It already has it in a drop down menu. Now we can choose the sign of the test. We can check if it's less than a value, greater than a value, or even less than a value. But remember, we want to check if it was equal to a value. And the value that we want to check if it's equal to is the number 4. So as a quick little recap on that, we're checking, first of all, the variable name, because we could have all sorts of different variables. So this differentiates which variable we're trying to access. And then we have the sign of the test. We're using equal to, and the value that we want to check is the number 4. So if I read this in English, what I'm saying is that if the variable number container is equal to 4, then we want to delete our cube object. And if I preview our program, let's see what we're going to see. You'll see absolutely nothing. That's because the first frame that we ran our program, it immediately deleted the cube. Immediately. Because it was set to the value of 4. And just to check that it works, you can double click into your number container, and let's see if it's equal to 5. Let's check if it's equal to 5 and see what happens. If I click OK, and then I preview again, you'll see that our cube is still here because the variable is not equal to 5. It is not equal to 5. Now, that is how you access variables, and that's how you use them in your game. But that's not really dynamic enough. That's just a simple basic variable check. And even though that is common when it comes to making games and programs, you should also know how to use them in a more dynamic way. Now, what we want to do here is accomplish a new task. We want to accomplish a new task. We want to create a variable that's called health. We want to create a variable that's called health. And health, if it is equal to 0, then we want to delete our cube. We want to delete it. But the only way for health to go down is that we're going to have to press the D key. So the D key has to be pressed if we want our variable health to go down. So the D key, what we're trying to say here is that when the D key is pressed, we want to subtract 1 from health. So I'm going to have a text so we can remember. Subtract, let's zoom in. Subtract 1 from health when the D key is pressed. Now, I know this is very jumbled right now, but what we want to happen is that if health is equal to 0, we want to delete cube, and also we want to subtract 1 from health when the D key is pressed. So you can see where we're going here. We will not be able to delete the cube unless the D key keeps being pressed. Now, let's actually go edit this. Let's go edit this. Now, when we go back into GDevelop, we need to set up a few things. First of all, we need to create a new variable. So think of how you can do it on your own for a second first. That's all the time you get. All of your thinking time is done. But of course, you can pause and think of it on your own. But if you don't know how to create a variable, once again, go into top left and then go into your scene. Under scenes, click the 3 dots and then edit scene variables. Now, when you get here, what you want to do is add a new variable. And the variable that we're going to add here is going to be called health. Remember, we're trying to alter a number, so we're going to keep it as a number variable. Now, this is the initial value of the variable. So we're going to check. We'll set this to, let's say 10. We're going to set it to 10. And we're going to hit apply. Now we have a health variable that is set equal to 10. So I'm going to click into this condition. I'm going to click on it, right click, and delete. Because we want to have a new condition that we want to check. We want to check if, remember, if health is equal to 0, then we want to delete our cube. We want to delete our cube. So let's add a new condition. And remember, like earlier, we're going to do the same thing. Go into other conditions, variables, variable value, and we want to check if health is equal to. Actually, we can make sure that the game detects it and doesn't miss it on a frame. We can check if it's less than or equal to 0. So now in plain English, we can say if the variable health is less than or equal to 0, then we want to delete our cube. Now if we preview, of course nothing will happen because right now the variable health is set to 10. So it's not less than or equal to 0, so nothing will happen. So now what we want to do is, remember, if the D key is pressed, we want to subtract 1 from health. Now we're going to add a condition, and we want to check, just like earlier, a keyboard input. So we're going to go into other conditions, keyboard, key pressed, and then we go into checking if the D key is pressed. And we're going to click OK. And we're going to add an action, and the action that we want to do is subtract the value 1 from health. So let's add an action, go into other actions because we're trying to access a variable. So variables, scene variables will always be in other actions. Go into variables, change variable value. The value that we want to change on the variable is going to be health. And this is important. There's a modification sign. Remember, we're trying to subtract 1. We're trying to subtract 1 from our variable. So the value that we want to subtract is 1. So right now we have the variable selected, which operation we want to do, and how much of the operation are we trying to accomplish. So right now, if I read this in plain English, if the D key is pressed, change the variable of health by 1. Subtract 1 from the variable health. Now, if I preview, I'm going to do something that you will not expect. If our variable is set to 10, you would probably expect that I have to press the D key 10 times in order to delete our variable. But I'm going to just hold the D key, and you can do it yourself too. If I hold the D key for like a second or two, it will delete. And why does it do that? I did this on purpose to set up a trap so you could learn. There's a trap for you to learn. And this is because the way that GDevelop's event works, the events work, they're checking it every frame. So what's happening is that every frame that the D key is pressed is subtracting 1 from our variable. It's not just doing it when we press it once. It's doing it for every frame that the D key is pressed. So how do we get rid of this every frame check for our conditions? Well, that's where trigger once comes in. This is a very important part and why I included it in our fundamentals here, because trigger once is going to be used a lot when you're making GDevelop projects. So how do we make it check it only once? Check if the D key has been pressed only once. Add a condition, go into other conditions, and then if you scroll down, you go into events and control flow, and then we have trigger once while true. And this is the best way to explain it. GDevelop explains it themselves. It runs the action only once for each time the conditions have been met. So when the condition of D key is pressed is met, this action will only be run once and will not run again until the D key is pressed again. So once again, read it. Run actions only once for each time the condition has been met. This is useful for input where you don't want the player or the user to keep holding input and it keeps happening every frame. So if I preview now, remember the D key being pressed will subtract 1. Right now health is at 10. So if I press it once, I'm going to count it out. It's at 9 now. I press it again. 8. Press it again. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And if I press it one more time, it should delete. I'm going to press it one more time. And it didn't delete. It must be at 0. And if I press it again, it deletes. Sometimes if you don't press it properly, that's on me, user error. It may not subtract. I didn't press my keyboard. But that is how you use variables in your project. And that's also how you use trigger once. Now, don't be too threatened by trigger once if you don't completely understand it right now. And also don't be too threatened by these variables. Variables are not as complicated as they seem, but there's also more to them than meets the eye. I highly recommend that you rewatch this section, especially if you didn't understand it, because variables are one of the most important parts in terms of making your program actually function. You will be using variables a lot. So don't glaze over this section and skip over it and just watch it once if you don't understand. Rewatch this part to make sure that you understand variables if you're having trouble, because we're going to be running into variables all throughout making GDevelop projects. So make sure that you understand this part. And just like that, if you did understand everything, I congratulate you for making it through the basics of GDevelop, and you're well on your way to becoming advanced and fluent in using GDevelop. Hello and welcome to the first part of our app development course. In this first part, we're going to be setting up the properties of our new tipping app. So, in order to set up properties for our app, we're going to start by creating a new project. We're not going to use our test project. You could if you want to, but we're going to start completely new. So once again, let's go to the top right over here. Let's go to File and let's create a new game. And we're going to create an empty project, not from a template. And we're going to also be using a mobile portrait as our default resolution because that's the default resolution for most apps. And that's the orientation most of the time is portrait. Now let's give our project an actual fitting name. So I'm going to call this project Tippit because that's going to be the name for our tipping app. And once again, save it on your computer. And I recommend that you save it in a folder, not the default. So let's choose a folder. And I'm going to simply save this in my documents, create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder the same name as my project. This is a general best practice for creating GDevelop projects. Now, once you have all of this set up, you want to create a new game. And once you create the new game, you should be greeted with a scene that looks like this. If I zoom out using the scroll wheel, you see that we have this black outline, and that's the mobile portrait outline. So this is how big the screen is. Now, one thing that we are going to set up is some resolution changes in the project manager. So how do we get to the project manager? We go to the top left once again, and now we have the game or app settings, and we're going to go into properties and icons. Now, there's not much we need to change here. We already have the device orientation set as portrait, and that's completely fine. We're going to have a portrait app. You can also make the publisher name if you plan on putting it on Google Play, but we're not going to worry about that yet. There's only one thing we want to change right now, and that is adjust the width to fill the screen. And the reason why is because this is a basic app development course, so we're not going to be dealing with the app making process of making your elements of your app stretch according to screen sizes. Right now we're going to have one set screen size because making your app stretch and be adaptable to every single screen size is more advanced and will be covered in a future course, but not a basic course. So what you want to do here is change the width and the height to be no changes to the game size. So now, no matter what device you're on, the game resolution or the app resolution will always be the same, no matter what device you're on. So you don't have to add a lot of extra programming to make it work on all screen sizes. So now I'm going to hit apply. And if I preview our scene, let's see what happens. Let's load the preview. It's going to take a little bit of time. And now when I preview, you see that we have this black outline around the side. And this is the setup. This is the set screen. So if I go to full screen, we still have this in the middle right here. So this will always be our app no matter what size our device is on. So it'll be compatible with all devices. And that's simply how you set up your properties for your app as a beginner. And in the next part, we're going to be learning how to add our first text object to our scene, which will be our title text. Welcome back to the course. In this part, we're going to be learning how to set up our title text. So we're going to be learning how to add our very own text. And the reason why we're using GDevelop for making this app, I just always want to flex GDevelop. It's so simple to add text. You don't even have to use programming or anything special in the events to add text to your scene. So all you need to do to add text is add an object. And when you add an object, you don't want to add a sprite or anything like that. GDevelop has many sections, but we want to scroll down to the text section. We also have rich text or BB text that allows a slightly more settings for your text, but we're going to stick with the basic text that we have right now. Now the object name, let's call it the title. We always want to make sure our object names are fitting to what they are so we don't have a confusing scene. And we're going to go over some of the settings here, almost all of them. Some of them are not too important right now, but we're going to go over most of them. Now, starting with the size of your text, this is self-explanatory. A lot of this is self-explanatory, but of course, the higher the size is, the bigger your text will be. You don't want to normally stretch your text box on the scene itself, which I'll cover later. You want to change the size in here, not in the scene view. Now, we also have the color of your text, which is black by default, and you can click the color, and you can change this using a slider, or you can type the exact hex value. If you're familiar with programming, you know what they are. We're not going to go too deep in them here, but you can look that up on your own. You can type the exact hex value as well if you want an exact color. So we're going to keep it at black. We also have bold. If we click this checkbox, then our text will be bold. If we click this text box, will be italic. and we have indentation of the text as well. And the indentation, this is left alignment, which is default, center alignment. You also have right alignment. And you also have alignment in the top, bottom, or center of the text box as well. So this is top, this is the center, and this is the bottom. Now, those are really all self-explanatory right there. But what's not necessarily self-explanatory is the font. Now, you can either choose a file from your device, which are in .ttf files, if you want to look up your own custom fonts. But also, you can choose one from the asset store, which is what we're going to be doing here because it's much simpler. So let's choose a font from the asset store. Now, GDevelop has an asset store that has free fonts in it and many free project files. So all you can do is just click a font that you want, and it shows it right here. It shows how it looks inside the scene. So I'm going to choose this regular Noto Sans font. So let's install the font, and it's going to take a few seconds, and then you'll have your font. It can be in a TTF file or .otf. And now that we have the font, before we go any further, let's hit apply, and let's drag this onto the scene to see how it looks. Now, if we look at it, if we scroll in and zoom in, it just looks like a regular piece of text. So let's double click and go back into our text. The next thing we can do is change the initial text display. And we're going to change this to the title. And remember, our app is called Tippet. So we're going to call this Tippet. Also, when we looked in the scene view, the size was very small. So let's set the size to being much bigger. Let's set it to 100. And now that we have that, there's a few more settings that we're going to go over. Now we have the outline. Once again, very, very self-explanatory. We can enable an outline. And let's make like a light blue outline. So I'm going to go into my color scroller down here. And I'm going to scroll it down to the blue section. I'm going to make it a nice light blue. Nice light blue right there. And also the outline, this is the outline color. We can also change the thickness. So I'm going to set it to 4. And let's see how it looks. We're going to once again apply. And we're going to preview. And you see that now we have our title right here. And we have a black text with the blue outline. So it looks a little bit more flashier than a regular text. And then we're going to double click back into our title. And last but not least, we're not going to worry about multi-line. It's not really important here. But last but not least, we're going to go into our shadow. You can add shadows to your text. Now, this right here, I'll just say it, is really not too special. Now, it depends on how creative you are and how you want to design your app, but I personally am not a fan of shadows. But you may be a fan of shadows yourself, but I still have to cover it even though I hate them. So let's go enable a shadow, and you can enable the distance of how far away you want the shadow to be from the object itself. You can also have shadow color. I recommend you keep it black, but you could have different colors. Let's test out a different shadow color. Let's see a red one. Let's see if it looks tacky or not. And we have a blur radius. How much do you want your shadow to be blurred around the center? You can also change the angle of your shadow, of where it's coming out of. And the opacity, how thick you want your shadow to be. So let's stick with mostly default settings and see how it looks. Let's hit apply. And if I preview, you'll see now coming out the back of our text is red. And honestly, I wasn't really a fan of shadows until I just used it right here. This looks pretty cool, I'll be honest. So maybe I just became a convert of shadows now. So I can see we have the red coming out of the back of the shadow, well, the back of the text. And it actually looks pretty cool. And you can see it in without even previewing the scene as well. So you don't even need to preview to see how it looks. Let's double click the title. And I'm going to change the angle just to see how that changes everything. So change the angle and change the distance. I'm going to set the distance as 10. And let's hit apply. And you see now the angle is coming more out of the side of the object since we changed the angle to 45 degrees. And we changed the distance so it's farther away from the object as well. But I'm going to keep it right here because this actually looks pretty fly in my opinion. And that is how you use the text object in GDevelop. So I recommend that you play around as your practice because you always want to practice whatever you just learned. I recommend you play around with the colors, play around with the outline, even change your text to bold or italic, play around with the indentation. And once again, if you're confused, make sure to ask questions and rewatch the video if you need to. And now that we know how to use the basics of text in GDevelop, in the next part, we're going to be going over our text input box for the app. Hello and welcome back to the course. In this part, we're going to be covering text input. Now, to start off with, what is text input in the first place? You may be a little confused. Text input is simply a box or a section where you can type in text or you can type in numbers. Now, this is going to be the front end part. And what I mean when I say front end, you may already know if you're a little bit familiar with app development, but front end is about the visuals of the app, and the back end is about the actual programming and the core functionality of the app. We're not going to make any functionality of saving our text value and reading and writing our text value that's in the text box. We're just going to simply focus on the front end part for right now. So we're going to add a new object. I'm going to make a new object, and this is going to be our text input. So if I scroll down until we see our text input box, I'm going to click this, and you see that we have a whole bunch of settings. Now, this stuff is not complicated. This is just GDevelop trying to be threatening. It's not threatening at all. We're going to keep things simple. Now, starting with the object name, let's remember what we're doing with this app. We have a tipping app where you have a base amount, and that's what you type in. And then after you have a base amount, the app is going to do the calculations of how much your tip should be. So we're going to start with the base amount, and we're going to call this text input base underscore amount. You don't have to do the underscore, but I personally like doing an underscore between words to make things look better. Now that we have this first name done, we're going to ignore all the threatening stuff. It even shows us a warning like it's not scary. We're going to go into our input text, and we have different text that can be inputted. Now, this is specifically really for app development because you don't really do much of this when it comes to game development. Now, you have the text, which is regular text. You have text area. You have email, specifically for emails, specific ones for passwords, numbers, telephone numbers, URLs, and even just regular like a search bar. Now, we have to remember what we're doing. Remember, for us, we're doing an app, and we're going to be reading a number value. So that's why we should set this up to be a number, because we could go over all of these, but it's not necessary for right now. It would take a much longer time going over every single thing. It just makes your text input a little bit different, and it's specific for certain things, like it will accept certain values. So if I set it to number, what I mean, for example, is that I won't be able to type any text into this box since I set it to number. That's what I mean when I say this. So we also have the maximum length. We don't have to worry about this because we're using numbers, and it says it right here. This property will be ignored if the input type is a number. So because of this, we don't have to worry about the max length. Now, before we go over border appearance, let's see how it actually looks on the scene so you can understand it visually better. So let's hit apply, and let's drag this base amount onto the scene, because this is how our text box actually looks. So right now it looks like a very plain text box. Let's preview the scene as well, just so we can see how it looks in the scene view. And it just looks like a very, very basic text box right here. So it says touch to start typing, and that's all that says, just very plain. So let's get out of here and go back into it so we can start changing some values. Now we have the color, which is the border appearance. This is the border, not the actual inside. So I'm going to change the color, since we have a little bit of a light blue theme going on. I'm going to change the color as also light blue. You could copy and paste the exact light blue that we made earlier, but we're not going to worry about that too much. You can also set the width of the box so it can be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to set the width as 4 just to see how it looks. Now, you have the initial value. The initial value is the first value that pops up when you have the text box. Right now, this is empty. So right now, the initial value is just nothing. That's why it was empty. But you also have the placeholder text, and it says touch to start typing. So if I hit apply, you'll see that this is already the placeholder text. So this is what it says in that faded out gray before you even see anything. So this should normally be your instructions when it comes to making an app. And remember what we're doing, we're making a tipping app. So I'm going to set the placeholder as enter your base amount. So this is basically giving our user the instructions of what they should do in the app. Now we also have different fields. Do you want the text box to be disabled? And this is mainly for programming the functionality. So if you want to disable a text box in a certain case, or if you want to be read only, where basically you can't write anything into the text, is set through programming. You can also enable a spell check, which is very cool. You can have it so it automatically tries to do a spell check. But for numbers, we don't need to enable a spell check. So let's just not even worry about it. Now, last but not least, we have two more things. We have the field appearance, which is the inside of the box. That's what they mean by field appearance, is the inside, the white. Let's double click and see it again. We have the field appearance, and we have the font. Now, we went over font earlier, so I'm not going to cover this too much here. It's pretty self-explanatory. But the fill color and the fill opacity, you can set the inside to be kind of faded if you want. The lower the opacity, the more faded it will be. So if I set the opacity to 100, let's hit apply, you'll see that it's much more grayed out. And if I preview it, you see that it's kind of fading a little bit more. Now, it's kind of hard to, well, yes, we can see it in the preview. The preview is much less white than it used to be. Now the background looks like the background of our app. So that can be pretty cool, especially if you want the background of your app to show under, your text. So, but I'm going to set it back to white, because I like how it looks regularly. So we're going to set the opacity as 255. Fill color, we're going to keep it the same as white, but just know you can make it whatever you want. And you also have padding. Now, when it comes to padding, what padding is how spaced out it is from the border. And what I mean by this, if we scroll up and zoom in, right here, there's the border. And if I'm really spaced out from the border, like let's say my mouse cursor is right here, the horizontal padding is much higher. But if I'm really close to the border, that means the padding is lower. And you have the horizontal padding, which is left and right. And you have the vertical padding, which is up and down. So let's go double clicking back in here again. I'm going to set the padding as 5 horizontal just to see. And we're going to set it as 2 vertical. We also have the text alignment. We can either set this as center or left. Normally right is weird. I'm just going to say that right now. You can try to be different and quirky using right, but it looks terrible. But let's set it as right, just so we can see how terrible it looks. Now let's hit apply. And now we see that you can't see it mainly too much because it's in pixels, but our text is a little bit more spaced out from the border than what it used to be horizontally, and same thing vertically. But as you can see, right alignment looks absolutely terrible, and that's why we don't use it. So scroll back down. I'm going to set the padding, text alignment back to left, and the padding to 10, so we can see it a little bit more. Now, as you can see, earlier it was much closer to the left border, but now since we set the padding as higher to 10, it's much farther away. But I say the default value of your padding is pretty good. So I'm going to set this back to, I believe it was 4 earlier or 2. I don't remember exactly, but we're going to set all of these back to default. So let's hit apply and let's preview our scene. Now we have enter base amount. And one thing I can see by looking at this, we may want to set our border as being a little bit thinner, because I can see this is bad app design. You see the text going through the border, but you can also type in whatever number you want. So I'm just typing in a bunch of random stuff, but you can't type in text either. So I'm going to X out of here. And that was most of what you can do with a text input object. And one more thing I want to do here is that we can change the size of our text box. Now you see that there's nothing to change your size in here. So how do we actually change our size of our text box? So let's hit apply, and we can click on our text box, and we can quite literally just stretch it out and make it bigger. And this is where padding comes in, because if you have a really big text box, you can start to see things start to get a little bit weirder in terms of where it is. This is also where centering your text comes in. So my challenge for you is to create a text box, which you already should have if you've been following along. Have a text box around this size. I want you to center your text. I'm not going to look back into it, so you can use the previous video, the previous times, to try to challenge yourself to see what to do. But I recommend you don't look at the video and try to see how to center your placeholder text into the middle of your text box to make it look better. But once you're done with that, in the next part, we're going to be covering our resource slider, which we'll be using for our tip percentage later. Welcome back to the course. In this part, we're going to be making a resource slider that will be handling the percentage amount that we want to tip in the future of our app. Now, once again, we're just dealing with the front end, which is the visual. We're not dealing with any of the back end functionality just yet. Now, it's very easy to create a resource slider. So I'm going to add a new object. If I scroll down to user interface, you see that we have a slider, and it lets us select a numerical value by dragging a slider. Now, when you first click this, it's going to give you options. You have skipping and creating one from scratch, which can give a beginner a headache. So we're not going to be creating one from scratch in this course. That's a little bit more advanced. Like I said, we don't want headaches. But we also have these default sliders right here. So you have a white one, a green one, and a blue one. You have these weird looking ones that I personally don't like. So we're not going to deal with these weird ones. I'm going to create a square blue slider because that matches with the theme of our app, which is the light blue. So we're going to use this one. And when you create it, it's going to kick you out for some odd reason. All you want to do is double click back into the square blue slider and you'll be back in. Now you have the label margin, and that's the label is the value that, well, actually it's better. You can't know what this is. That's why it's not a really good explanation right here. You can't know what this is until you preview it and check it for yourself. So I'll show you what the label is. So let's hit apply, and let's hit, well, before we preview, let's drag it onto the scene, and we can see how it looks. It looks like just a blue bar with a little square on the end of it. And let's preview it. Go full screen to get a little bit closer. And what they mean by resource, if you have good enough eyesight to see that, because even I can barely see it, you have this white text above our slider, and this shows the value of it. So this is what they mean by label. They don't say it in there. You have to actually test it yourself. So that's the label that's above it. So let's X out, double click back into our slider, and you can change the label margin. This is similar to the padding. This will change the distance that the label is away from your actual bar itself. Now, important thing that you can do is that you can change the initial value of your slider. Now, when it comes to tipping, this is not too important. You could change the initial value to 0, but there's a tipping app. So a basic tip would be like 15 to 20%, maybe even lower, depending on who you are. Just depends on the person. We're not going to get too moral right now. Not going to go into more high ground, but let's set the initial value for the tip as being 15. And you can also set the minimum value of your slider. So it doesn't have to go from 0 to 100. It could go from 0 to 50 if you wanted to. Because let's say you didn't want people overspending. You didn't want to encourage overspending on your tipping app. You could then set the maximum value to being something like 40. So you didn't encourage people to just go absolutely crazy on their tipping. But I would encourage people to do what they want. So I'll put the maximum value as 100 anyway. So you also have the step size, which is the last thing here, and the step size changes what is the minimum amount of value that it can move while you're sliding. So basically, this is the increments in which your number moves. So since the step size is 1, that means it can only move 1 at a time. But let's say that you want your user to be able to access decimals in terms of tipping, which is honestly overkill. But you could put the step size as 0.5. So now there's in between values. It's not just moving from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's moving from 0, 0.5, then 1, 1.5, and so on and so forth. So let's hit apply. And I'm also going to make this slider much bigger. And a good thing that you can do here, like let's say you want to keep it proportional. If you want to keep it proportional, if you scroll over keep ratio right here, keep ratio is exactly what it says, keep ratio. And it's on by default. If we click it, it's off. If we click it, it's back on. So we're going to keep that on. And then you can change just one value, either the width or the height. So I'm going to change it to 300. And now it's going to update proportionally. I'm going to set it to being even bigger, 400. So now we have a much bigger resource bar. And let's hit preview. And now that we're previewing our scene, you see that we have a much bigger bar. And we can change it in different steps. And one thing I'm going to do just so we can see it better, because by default, since we're not programming a super custom one, which once again would give a beginner a headache, the text value is always going to be white by default. So let's fix this problem real quick, because there's a real problem that you're going to run into right now. So let's go into our layers, because we want to change our background so we can see that text better. Let's go into our layers, and there's the layers panel right here. And if you went over the basics, you should be aware of how to open that, but you just click the top here. and we can change our background color. So let's change our background color to something a little bit darker so the white doesn't blend in as well. And also I'm going to double click on my slider and change the margin as being bigger. So I'm going to put the margin as 8, and let's hit apply and preview once again. So now you can see that we're sliding around, and since we set our step size as 0.5, you see that now we have decimals in between as well. So it's currently set at 42.5. So I'm going to X out of here, and that was that part right there for the resource slider. That is how you make a very, very basic resource slider. Once again, a custom one will be covered in an advanced course, not a beginner course, because your brain would probably explode as a beginner going into that. But one more thing we're going to do before we leave off. This is a recommendation because it would be weird to have a tip amount slider be in the step size of 0.5. So I recommend that you don't ever set this to a decimal. Think about the type of app you're making. And so we're making a tipping app, set the step size as 1, and that would be your best bet in terms of making a well-designed app. But if you are really crazy, you could set it to something like 0.1. But anyway, in the next part, we're going to be covering adding more text. We're not going to be adding titles, but we're going to be adding the tipping text, the total text, and even the tip percentage text. So we're going to be adding all of those in the next part.